Going to try and keep this one relatively quick. This is somewhat of a hot take, although I have sat with it for a couple of weeks, so I guess that makes it not a hot take, on the House of the Dragon day for night scenes. Now, it's not the first time that Game of Thrones has come under fire from, you know, all corners, people who think they know a little bit about filming stuff, like me, and the general public who are out there just watching this on their TVs or their phones or their tablets and just going, I can't see a single thing that's happening. Most notably, way back when we had the battle at Winterfell with all the walkers coming in and no one could see a single thing. So this is interesting specifically because it is a day for night sequence. Now, some of you might be sitting there wondering what day for night actually is. Basically, if you want to shoot a night scene, but you don't have the time or the budget, you know, you need a lot of lighting, it's harder to shoot at night for any number of reasons, scheduling being the probably most important, and especially if you're working with child actors, that's really relevant. We'll come back to that. But basically, it's cheaper just to shoot it in the daytime, and you use what is naturally there, sunlight, and then you just color it in post to look a little bit blue, bring the contrast down, do whatever it is you're going to be doing to sell that day for night vibe, and that's it. You've got your sequence ready to go, and you didn't have to spend a fortune doing it. Now, the problem with that is that often it really doesn't look realistic. But I think that's where I start to lose the argument a little bit. People say this doesn't look good. This doesn't look like it should do. And what it should look like is, it's a bit of an odd question, you know, what does it actually look like at nighttime? And I think that one of the things that I find difficult when I'm looking at this is kind of drawing a line under what is a stylistic choice that you're doing for an artistic reason, and what is something which is just down to the limitations, whatever they are, budget, technical, anything. And when I'm looking at these kind of scenes, I'm trying to wrestle with, you know, is this good? Is it satisfying from a, you know, visual standpoint? Is there something going on, or is it just a compromise? We're going to dive in. So right off the bat, and full screen this, it's dark. It's so dark. Like, we can see, you know, lucky they're Targaryens, isn't it? Because otherwise, you know, we would have hardly anything going on here. So looking at this, we've got moonlight catching on the backs of their heads just there. So you've got a little bit going on each of them, which is fine. There's some detail in the sky in the background. And then you have a fair amount of just contrast all over the shop, which, well, you can make out the shapes of the humans there, and that's all cool, but it's not really giving you all that much in their face. You can't read what the actor is emoting. And you don't always need that, you know, look at them like the Mandalorian, you got a helmet on, you can't see the face. But in these scenes, you do feel like maybe you should be able to see a little bit of the eyes and that kind of stuff. And as we flick through, we're going to see more and more of this kind of thing just creeping in. So, for example, this wide shot just here, yeah, they're over in this corner. We've got quite a lot of detail going on in the sky. And that's something that you do find with day for night. You're shooting outside, shooting in the daytime. The sky is going to be a lot brighter, and there are going to be clouds in there. They're going to be catching the light more. So maybe you're looking at doing a sky replacement. So in some of these shots, you can definitely see that there are little stars and things that they've added in there, which help to sell the day for night, you know, vibe, it being actually nighttime. But on the whole, everything's so low. Everything's so crunched down right at the, I mean, I'm looking at my screen just here, and my reflection is, from my light up here, is just obscuring what I can see on the screen. And this isn't a glossy screen that I'm looking at. This is a matte screen, and it's just hard to make out the details on the person. So although you win a bit on budget, I'm not sure that you're really winning on the narrative side of things. All of that said, why do it? Why go to the trouble of shooting a scene and then post-converting it when you know that there's going to be a little bit of a debacle around it. I have obviously opinions on this, but I think that it sits in a broader conversation about the way that you approach these kinds of night scenes. So I'm going to jump in and look at some other films that have day for night scenes. We have Mad Max Fury Road. Personally, I actually didn't find this super distracting because the whole film is really stylized. You know, it's not a realistic world. It's for any reason post-apocalyptic. Everything's super saturated. You've got the orange everywhere, you know, just deep color in the frames. And when we got to this sequence, it was an interesting break to that rhythm. Same as with the sandstorm that they encountered, that, you know, like one of the first big obstacles that they come to, that huge storm with the fire and the sand and the lightning, and all of that was a visual break. And then you have this blue scene as a visual break. And I think that I never questioned it. I didn't really think about the technical, which is interesting for me because often I will get caught up in the technical side of why things are done, how they're done, all of that kind of stuff. But here, I actually enjoyed it. I thought that the day for night vibe that they got kind of worked. It isn't a realistic world they're meant to be in. It isn't a world where you're necessarily trying to look at things in the way that you would do if they were just going out for a walk on a beach. You know, this is the apocalypse. This is something after a massive catastrophic event has ruined civilization. So yeah, maybe everything does feel weird and otherworldly. I found it really interesting that they had these pops of like warm color within there as well, which, you know, there's a narrative purpose, isn't there? Look at the framing and the situation. You've got the wives in the back, you know, lit up with this warm glow. They're back there. They don't have to worry about what's happening as much as Furiosa in the front. You know, she's separate from them. She's a loner. She's having to deal with the massive issue that they have and take the burden of that. So the framing and the lighting is all playing to this. Then when we jump over to this one, there's our little war boy, you know, and there's a warm light on them. He's a little bit more humanized by that. He's being brought into the fold. So I think that the way that the day for night scenes sit in this actually kind of works. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that technically they all look fantastic. There are some things you look at and you go, well, yeah, I can kind of tell that this is shot in the daytime. There's sunlight hitting them. But I think it actually looks good for what it needs to do in the film. Now, did you notice, when we flip to this, you know, obviously it goes huge orange, but did you notice the point at which I snuck a couple of things by us there? So we have all of these scenes, and then, if I, these are all scenes that I've just done a really, really bad, quick blue grade on. Some of them work better than others to make it day for night. And that one I didn't do because it really didn't work, because the sky's all bleached out to white in the background. There are concessions that you have to make when you are shooting to how you're going to do this. And I've heard lots of discussion around how they went for this, and people coming down and saying, oh, actually you want to overexpose for it rather than underexpose, which is what people normally do. And that allowed them to get more detail in the shadows, which help to, you know, when you get to the grade. All kinds of things. We're not going to look at the technical details and how you do it in this episode, but it's just fascinating that you can just post-convert some of this stuff, and it sort of just sits with the other stuff you see there. Looking at it again now, some of those are a little bit more steely, greeny blue than the ones that I post-converted, which are a little bit inkier, more magenta-y kind of blue. But fascinating, isn't it? You can get away with that. Now, there are other films that have done day for night sequences. Where the Wild Things Are, great example, great reason to do a day for night scene, because they're working with child actors and the scheduling was a problem. You can't make the child actors work long nights like you potentially could do with a full cast of adult actors. So in Where the Wild Things Are, we have day for night scenes, and they work. And I think that this, next to Mad Max, well, he is it he or she or the character is going to where the wild things are, and that place isn't the normal world. So maybe it doesn't look realistic, but maybe it doesn't have to, because maybe that's part of the visual style, which is telling you more about the environment and the vibe and the fact that this isn't the real world. This is moving over to something a little bit different, a little bit unreal. Obligatory moonshot. You got to sell something, put the moon in there. You'll be laughing because people will just accept that's where the light's coming from. I saw the moon. In Heat, day for night scene. Really simple one. Just looking out of a window. Color grade it blue, pull everything down a little bit, and you got your night scene. I could see if it's just 1 or 2 shots that you got to do, and you have the talent in the space, and you've been doing some other scenes, and you don't want to have to wait until night just to do these 2 shots. Sure, probably blink and you'll miss it. Most people won't even notice, so why not? Just make it a thing. Lawrence of Arabia. This one, less blue filter, and when we look back, it's harder when you're on film to go in and do an extreme grade like you would do perhaps if you're looking at Mad Max Fury Road. You know, they had the benefit of shooting on digital, being able to look at the footage, maybe have a DIT there, someone grading and working out how to best approach the exposure and how they were baking things in at that level, so they had the most flexibility when they came to work in post. On film, Lawrence of Arabia, they don't have the luxury, so everything they do, they've got to try to some extent to work in camera. Now, appreciate you could probably do a push or a pull, and bring your exposure down by just giving it a different chemical process, but you are a little bit more limited on how far you can take that. And here we do see a little bit more color in it. Shooting in the desert, really, really hard. They're gonna have to bring in all the lights and stuff to do these night scenes, so you can see why they did it. There's not really a question of whether it's better or not. It's like, but they might not have got the shots. They might not have been able to tell the story in the way that it needed to be told if they didn't do it like this. I'm defending day for night a lot. I don't know why. I feel like whenever I look at these shots, I understand the reason for most of them from a filmmaking point of view. Pan's Labyrinth. This one, I feel, falls apart a little bit more, mostly because of the brightness of the foliage in the background. And that's something in night scenes, I realize that you have to help the audience to see the characters. And one of the ways you could do this is to lighten up the background, because at night everything's going to be dark. You need to make out the forms of your characters, so having a lighter background behind them helps to do that. But I think in Pan's Labyrinth, it actually goes a little bit too far, and we get a really hot, zingy kind of vibe with all of this foliage just being caught. They do have that blue cast, bluey greeny cast to everything, but I don't think it works quite as well in that example. And then the beach. This one's actually, it's on a beach. Very, very similar to the Game of Thrones House of the Dragon example. We can see a little bit more on their face, but not loads more. You know, it's kind of similar to House of the Dragon in that respect. It has the hard backlight. You have a little bit of return onto their faces, but basically the same kind of thing as House of the Dragon. So what am I saying with all of this? Well, I think that there are a lot of things that you can do to get around the night scenes and make it work for your production. Don't discount day for night, because I think it's actually a valid creative tool. It's just not perhaps the way of going if you want something to sit in the lexicon of film night scenes and not stand out. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at something else. Let's look at, here we go, The Howling. When people, let's cut to that. When people think about night in films, they're probably more familiar with stuff like this, where it has been lit and we have more of the visual cues that are telling us that it's nighttime, but we still retain detail and texture and depth and all of that good stuff you can see going on in here. I mean, looking in the background just there, you can see we've got this haze which is being caught by, it would have been some big lights, either, oh God, this is years and years ago, like Maxi Brutes or some kind of HMI source. And then in the foreground you've got the torch on our characters just there, just to help draw our eye into where they are. And obviously they're at night, it's dark, they need a torch. Works for narrative purposes, but it also helps us to see immediately where we're meant to be looking. Catching the edges of them, you know, you've got all of that light that's casting on the background, also helping to define them. And I think it's important to like look at what you've got going on just here, because that area actually really stands out, because you've got some shadow, and then behind it you've got another area of illuminated foliage and a shaft of light. But then flip over to this side and it is all dark. So actually the frame kind of draws your eye around and down to where the characters are, works really nicely, and that's kind of filmmaking, you know, that's sensible choices about how the characters and the background interact so that the audience look where you want them to look. Especially important in a horror film as well, because you want someone to be looking somewhere and maybe then something's going to come out of the corner of it. It has a purpose. When we look at this compared to the Game of Thrones, you don't immediately see where to look as much. There's not contrast. There's not a flashlight drawing your eye, appreciating that, you know, okay, it would be a flaming torch or whatever it is they would be walking along with. But having that thing to catch your eye really helps. The highlights on the hair are also a little bit brighter here. So it's not just the torch. Take the torch out of the equation and you've still got something there, the little shine on the guns, even brighter. It helps you to see where you've got to look to understand the story. Okay. I can't remember what film this was, The Huntsman or something. Very similar story. May have been shot on a soundstage, but we still have that layering of contrast. You can see forms and shapes, and there's atmosphere in the background which is catching the light, and that creates a lighter area behind our characters, which helps you to see where they are. And that is something we're going to see time and again. Lord of the Rings, I forget which one this is, but you can really clearly see the detail in their faces. We've got stuff going on in the background over here. You know, there's lightness. We've got the edge on them, key light coming in. We can make out details behind on this side, but it isn't super bright. And you can see their eyes, and that really helps to endear you to the character. It's not all about that, but looking at this, you've got a little twinkle in Frodo's eye there. You can see his face, you can see the emotions. Again, we have all of those things we would talk about. There's atmosphere behind, there's tons of light on their faces, and this is the Hollywood answer. This is the answer to how we see things at night. And someone reminded me of a great quote recently. When Peter Jackson was shooting this, and we have all these shafts of light coming in the battle scenes, and it's meant to be nighttime, and it's raining at Helm's Deep, and so I said, well, where's the light coming from? You know, where are these shafts of light coming from? And Peter Jackson apparently said, the same place the music's coming from. And I think that's just a great way of looking at it, because you're not really capturing reality. You're always imposing, as a filmmaker, as a director, as a cinematographer, whatever you're doing within the process, you are imposing your ideas, your way of seeing things onto the audience. And that can be in your lens choice, you know. We have one pair of eyes, we look at a certain focal length, and sometimes things can feel like we're focused in on them, or if we're seeing something in a room with people around us, maybe we're looking more in our peripheral vision, but we still only have one set of eyes. When you put a lens on, you're saying that you're suddenly focused in an unnatural way on a certain character or a certain object. So everything that you choose to do is taking it further away from reality. The edits that you make, the music that you put over it, the sound design, the lighting strokes so that you can see your characters' faces, all of those things help to make it feel more immersive for the audience. And the moment that you break that immersion with a lighting choice or a camera choice, you really have to know what you're doing, and it can be very effective to snap the audience out of it and make something feel unnerving, unnatural, a little bit wrong, but you need to know why you're doing it. And I think that is perhaps where the House of the Dragon thing just didn't make sense. Generally, I think the cinematography in that really knows what it's doing. In those episodes, I just feel a little bit that it's a choice to try and edge towards realism when realism isn't necessarily that. It wouldn't even feel like that at nighttime. It would feel different from that, I think. You can't recreate the vibe of a night stroll along a beach just by crunching everything down so far. It's more textural, you're living it in a different way to the way that the camera will see it and the way that you've graded it. It's my opinion. Like I say, this is a bit of a hot take. Moving on. I appreciate this is probably a miniatures and CG shot, but still, you have intention with the lighting. We've got things coming in from, above, catching all the tops of the battlements, catching all the tops of the helmets, and then all of the little touches of like torchlight around, helping to break everything up. Imagine how flat this would be if you didn't have all of those specular highlights, if you didn't have the orange torchlight in there, if it was just monochrome. And in fact, let's just real quick, because I don't want this to be too long. I have a tendency just to talk. Let's crunch it down, bring that back on, and desaturate it a little bit, and take the contrast down a little bit. And now we're still going to have some of the highlights and stuff on the battlements. There's no way of really avoiding that. We can go even further down than that. They were way down in House of the Dragon. You lose so much of what could be there, and the storytelling that you could be having without really thinking about the consequences. I don't know. Yeah. Let's move on. Now, there are some scenes where I feel that the contrast drops a little bit. It's not as clear as that particular scene, but you still have, even in this scene, you got foreground interest with shapes and silhouettes. The light is sort of a soft push, but it's more in the middle of the frame, from just beyond that tree at the top there. And then the people behind the light source, people, goblins, orcs, are lit a little bit more flat because they're catching it front on. Whereas, jump back here, everyone is more silhouetted against it. So even then, we have shape and we have structure to the frame, which helps massively. Shafts of light coming up behind, lighting up the atmosphere. You've got plenty of light on the main talent's face. You've got edges on everything. You can clearly see where you're meant to be looking. It's a fast action, people moving, lots of drama. You've got to know what's going on, and you do. And it's cool, stylized, but it works. Here, there's less color. You can make out less in their faces, but there's contrast. There's lines in the background where the light's hitting the rock. You've got the battlement behind them. You've got their silhouette being caught by those same lights. It works. Moving on to, that was June. Again, very different kind of night scene. Very down, but we can still see eyes. We can still see skin. And we've got this form around her just framing her, drawing us into the center just there. Go retro. This is the X-Files film. I wanted to find some X-Files TV episodes, but I didn't have time to pull them all out. But the lighting here is way up compared to a lot of things we've been looking at. And this is a night scene. You've got blue just tickling in the background over the top of the corn just there. Obviously, we're getting green detail in the corn and tons of light on their faces. You can see the characters. Go back, season 1 or 2, maybe season 2, Game of Thrones. We've got Catelyn Stark just there, and Jaime Lannister, I think that is. You can see them. There's some smoke or breath in the air just there, helping to, see the light. There is definitely light coming in here. Lots of light on her face, a bit of an edge on her as well. It doesn't feel like torchlight necessarily. It's just light because we need to see our characters. And then go back to season 1, Jon Snow. Hard light on Jon, all coming as a push from this direction. You can see on his nose line just there, it's coming in there, and also have a little bit on his shoulder. And you've got some on the wall in the back so that you can make out the character, so that you can see that he's there. Tyrion gets a similar treatment, got a little twinkle in his eye, and light catching on the back, just making out shape and forms. Now I think what's interesting with all of this is I didn't pick out any examples which take place in a modern setting like a city, because the moment that you're in an environment where there will be lighting from other sources at night, the whole day for night thing falls down. So it's not something that you will often find in a scene where you are out in I don't know, a street in London, because there are car headlights, because there are lampposts. I suppose maybe in 28 weeks later, I think they did some of the scenes in the daytime because they had child actors in that, and they had to do that, and it was going to be really expensive to get that looking right. And I think that another reason for that choice was if they did it at night, windows would be illuminated. So by doing it in the daytime, the windows aren't illuminated. So when they pull everything down and do the day for night, everything looks a little bit more realistic in that respect, because they didn't have to either go in and, make people turn out lights in windows, or have lights in windows on that they then have to paint out in post, be really expensive. So that's another consideration for why you would do something in this way. But again, 28 days later, dealing with zombie apocalypse, there's no power on, and that's a reason why you can get away with a day for night in the city for that particular purpose, but it's a really niche purpose. Now, I actually went out and did a little day for night test with Ben. Ben was kind enough to stand in a few places around the studios and do some little day for night tests. Now, the vibe that I was going here was definitely a little bit more leaning towards Mad Max, Fury Road, but it's not impossible to go out and do this kind of thing. I think that as I was doing these, we're looking at it in different ways. We're moving around so that the light is in different places. Probably the most convincing is this one, where we have the light coming in, giving a hard edge. The one thing I didn't do, because we just did this as a super, super quick test, and I want to come back to it and do like a whole thing where we actually really try hard to make it look good. We could have brought in a little bit of bounce just to kick something back into Ben's face, so when we crunch everything down to do the day for night, he's got an edge from the moonlight, and he's got enough light returned into his face so that you can still make out some of his features. Because here, when we click to the day for night, you do lose his face in that. But it is cool, it's kind of fun. It didn't really take any time to do, and if we had to do a super quick scene where you just had to sell that effect, just make sure that you're not clipping anything too much. I think with this, the challenge was that we have other things in the background, like you've got this car down here, which is also catching the light. So when it goes to the night shot for that, it's actually a little bit kind of overexposed in those specular highlights. So it's the kind of thing you got to watch out for. And, if you really wanted to make this work, you'd go in and post and paint those out, and that'd be just fine. Then we have, clear that off, this example where Ben's actually getting full sunlight. So It's direct on his face. This doesn't flatten down as nicely, I don't think, because it just goes a little bit weird. The sky behind him comes out better because it sits darker and it feels more like gradiated night sky than the other shots do, and that's harder to get over, especially if you can see the sun in your shot. You just forget about it. It's going to be impossible to make it really read right, and a lot of rotoscoping to take out that sky, replace it convincingly, put a moon in there. But the whole thing, when you go back to ungraded version of it, let me just take a cut on that, cut that in half so we can compare the two. Obviously drop that down loads and change the color temperature. Okay, take all of those off, and then we can compare Ben like this at the night scene to the day scene. Squinting, dead giveaway that you're in the sunlight. It's going to be harder to sell that if you're saying that's moonlight, but it works well enough. And I think if you're thinking about this in a clever way, you could definitely get around that not having to shoot at night, bring in lights, all the rest of it. So what am I saying? What's my take on all of this stuff? Well, if you need to get a day for night scene, don't be put off by the Game of Thrones example. I think that's not the best example of a day for night scene. Appreciate why you're doing it. Really try and lean into it heavily. Make sure that the stuff that you're doing is going to look as good as possible, bringing in bounce, making sure you're not shooting anything super bright in the background, trying to add in little hints that maybe it is nighttime, get some shots of the moon from something else, even get a bit of stock footage of the moon, helps to sell it. If you can go and film at night and use lights, then you're going to get something that fits in the language of the films and the TV shows that people watch, probably a little bit more neatly. But as someone who has had to shoot at night, it's incredibly difficult to do. It's tiring, it's hard to set up in the dark, so it's best to try to get there early. And all of the examples that really I was looking at just there are examples where there wouldn't be any pre-existing light source. So you do have to take those liberties with where the light is coming from. It's the Peter Jackson example again, the light's just there because we want people to have a better experience and see what we're trying to show them. If you do that in a way which is crass, it can be a little bit more obvious, and the light just doesn't help to knit everything together. And that is where the skill is. That's where the gratification is if you get it right as well. So trying to understand all of that and bring that all together is something which, as a cinematographer, you're going to probably want to experiment with. But you can still have fun experimenting with the day for night stuff if you're doing it in a knowing fashion.